Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava Kamma. We are up to Perek Gimel Mishnah Alayev. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilun Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Chana bat Miriam Sason ben Raya and Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam beGan Eden Amen and Le'avdi ben Chaim leChaim v'derefua shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa betoch Shachulei Israel. This chapter deals with the second of the four categories of damage listed in chapter 1, Mishnah 1, namely a pit in a public area, what we call a bull. This category includes any obstacle that, like a pit, does not move. The first Mishnah discusses a jug that was left in a public area, such as a street, where it caused damage or was damaged. Hamaniach et akad b'rshut harabim. If someone leaves a jug on the ground in a public place, and another person comes, stumbles over it, and breaks it. Patur, he is exempt from paying for it. This is because people do not usually look down at the ground when they are walking. Therefore, the damager cannot be blamed for failing to notice something that was not expected to be there. V'imuzak ba, and if he was injured by the jug, the owner of the jug is obligated to pay for his injury because it was an obstacle in a public area like a pit. Now, although the Mishnah previously used the word kad, here it uses chavit in order to teach that in certain regions these words have the same meaning. This is relevant to the laws of buying and selling, where the words used by the buyer and seller define the object being sold. Now, again, the concluding part of the Mishnah was, if somebody was injured by the jug, the owner of the jug is obligated to pay for his injury because it was an obstacle in a public area like a pit. Now, the commentators explain, even if you give up ownership of the jug, he must pay for whatever damage it causes. This is derived from the laws of bor, a pit in a public area. The person who dug the pit is responsible for it as though he were its owner, although it does not actually belong to him, as the Gemara explains in Bava Kamma, page 29b. A related case, Nishbera chado b'reshut harabim. If someone carrying a jug of water stumbled and fell, and his jug broke in a public place, v'uchlak echad b'mayim, and someone else slipped on the water, or shelaka b'charaser, or was injured by its shards of pottery, chayav, the owner of the jug is obligated to pay. Since the owner of the jug could have avoided stumbling and falling, he is responsible for creating the hazard of the water and shards lying on the ground. According to this Tana, a person who stumbles on the ground is considered negligent. The person who slipped on the water, on the other hand, was not negligent because his slipping was caused by an obstacle that he was not expected to see. And similarly, in the Mishnah's first case, where someone stumbled over a jug, his fall was caused by something unexpected. And again, therefore, in our case, where the owner stumbled and fell, and his jug broke in a public place, and someone else slipped on the water, was injured by the shards of pottery, he must pay for whatever damage he caused. Since the jug carrier was negligent in that he stumbled, he is viewed as though he created the hazard with his own hands, similar to someone who dug a pit in public property, and therefore he is liable even if he gave up ownership of the water and shards. The next Tana disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, "B'mitkaven chayav." If he intends to keep the water and the shards, he is indeed obligated to pay. Beno mitkaven patur. But if he does not intend to keep them, he is exempt. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this person is not viewed as having created the hazard because he stumbled and fell through no fault of his own. Unlike the previous Tana, Rabbi Yehuda holds that stumbling is not negligence. Therefore, he is exempt from payment. However, if he intends to keep the water and shards, he is liable because they are his property. There are two situations in which a person can be liable for damage caused by an obstacle in a public area. A, he created the obstacle, in which case he is always liable, even if he does not own it. For example, he dug a pit in a public place. And B, he did not create the obstacle, but he owns it. If a person's property happens to be in a place where it could do damage, he must remove it, even if he did not put it there. And if he had time to remove it but failed to do so before damage occurs, he must pay for the damage. And the Rav does explain to us that in this disagreement, the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, dinitka lav poshehu, that stumbling is not considered a person being negligent, umeachar da'anusu, and since he is anus, he was not negligent, it was an unforeseen circumstance, v'lo nitkaven liskot b'charaser b'mayim, and he does not intend to keep the shards and the water, It's considered in the eyes of halacha as if it was never owned by him, and he is exempt from its damage. But again, Rabbi Yehuda does agree that if he intends to keep the water in shards, he is indeed obligated to pay. And that is the end of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet continues to deal with the laws of an obstacle in a public area, what we call a bor. Hashofech mayim b'rshut harabim, if someone pours out water in a public place at a time when he is permitted to do so, for example, during the rainy season when the ground is muddy, pouring water into a street is allowed because it makes little difference to the condition of the street. V'uzak b'ayin acher, and someone else slipped on the water and was injured because of it. Chayav b'nisko, he is obligated to compensate the victim for his injury. Even though he was permitted to pour out the water, he must pay for whatever damage it causes. He has to pay even though he does not want to keep the water. Since it created the hazard, he is responsible for it despite the fact that it does not belong to him. Hamatznia et akotz v'dezichuchit, if someone hides a thorn or shard of glass in a public place, for example, he hit a thorn in a rickety wall that later fell into the street, and the thorn caused damage there. Since he should have realized that the wall might collapse, he is liable for the damage. V'agoder et gidero b'kotzim, or if he builds a fence of thorns next to a public place. Now he owned land next to a public place, and he made a wall of thorns between the two areas. Now he is liable only if the thorns protrude into the public area, and people might walk into them. However, if the thorns do not protrude into the public area and someone was injured by pressing himself against them, the owner of the fence is not liable because people generally do not press themselves against walls. He was not expected to think that such damage might occur. But again, in the Mishnah's case where he builds a fence of thorns next to a public place, the thorns protruded to the public area and people might walk into them. Or if his stone fence fell into a public place. Now, if it was not his fault that the wall fell, he is not considered to have created the obstacle. Nevertheless, if he retained ownership of the stones and did not remove them as soon as he could, he must pay for whatever damage they cause. And in any of these cases, other people were injured by any of these items. Chayav b'niskan, he is obligated to pay for their injuries. Again, with the conditions that we explained based on the commentaries. That is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.